I shall start this story in the middle, for it is my favourite part. We were at sea, me and my ferryman, taking me like Charon across dangerous waters of the stormy sea towards my fated destination. The waves were foaming with fury, rising like butter spread over too little bread, tossing us around as if we, in our tiny boat, were naught but a crumb. But it did not matter. What was important was how it made me feel. And I was brimming with excitement, for I was hand-picked by the lords of criticism to take down the Longman himself. It all started that one fateful summer afternoon. Me and my fellow students of the Great Academy of Begidius were out discussing the nature of traphood, much like our idols once had, when High Priestess Jabania Nicholson motioned me to follow her, and so I did. She led me through the halls to her office chamber. It was filled with statues of the porg, the noblest animal in our land. Rumours said that in one of those statues, Jabiticus the Bushman was entombed. He was a jester that once rolled up with his troop to the academy. Some say that at full moon, he can still be heard in the halls, begging for applause. And then I saw that at Jabania's desk, celestially illuminated, sat Lord Quintinius himself, with Inquisitor Taxon behind him. He had returned from his journey to investigate certain disturbing rumors. On his way back, he consulted with a tribe of oracle spiders who had told him that a Longman yet lives, and he thinks his opinions objective, while everyone else's are subjective. He cursed the damned arachnids with great fury, likening them to the traitorous Trumpius, whom he hated with a passion known to all. Then Inquisitor Taxon stepped in to allow Quintinius to calm, and explained that despite the foul arachnids' unwillingness to cooperate, Inquisition's spies managed to discern that, in their opinion, the dreaded Longman was in hiding in a fort on the Isle of Man archipelago. And so I set off, with all equipment and knowledge needed to destroy the masked menace once and for all. In a flash of thunder, I glimpsed the silhouette of the castle. It was a majestic fortress, built on the longest island of all the Isles of Man by a crazed architect, Shadius the First, who, after fortifying all of Australia, travelled across the world in his quest to build as many castles as he could. If the inquisitorial spies were to be trusted, this keep was where the Longman had been residing. And finally, our boat has met shore, like the lips of the famed lovers Kylo and Rey. I bid my ferryman goodbye as he set off into the tides of the storm to go back to his harbour. He had no place to stay here on this blasted rock, and if my deed was to be done, by tomorrow morning I would be waiting for him with the head of my target in a burlap sack, looking out into the sea from this very shore. But now I was alone, about to fulfill my destiny. Another flash of lightning illuminated the grim castle walls and the rocky path towards them. There was no turning back for me now. I was, however, still in good spirits. I was certain that I was chosen by Quintinius, not without a good reason. As long as I adhered to the subjective teachings of the school of Begidius, and remembered the wisdom of Master Mihai Cheek Sent Mihai, my opinion was in no danger of change. I approached a grand gate, with many a strange rune inscribed upon it. One inscription, however, right above the knocker, simply said, Omni pictura quidam mora. The knocker itself was quite peculiar as well. In place of a lion or tiger, or even human head, it was a rhinoceros, a beast from the far lands of Wakanda, popularly farmed there for its exquisite dairy, but quite unusual in our realms. I reached my arm out for the knocker, about to put it to its intended use, when out of the corner of the doorframe came a shriek.
Oh, sure. Everyone goes for the knocker. Why's the knocker always get to open the door?
I froze with fear, unsure of who it was shrieking at me. I gazed in the direction from which it was coming, and all I saw was a bronze doorbell hanging on the side, green with patina, though judging by its words, it could as well be envy. Greetings, doorbell. May you grant me entry into this here fortress grim?
Oh, of course. You get to enter and see what's inside, and I have to hang here and rot.
Believe me, doorbell, the task I must carry out within those walls is not one to envy.
Do not tell me what I can envy or not. Jealousy's all I've got.
The doorbell jingled angrily, and at the sound of its tone, the massive gate before me budged, and with a creak, it revealed the interior. I rushed in, out of the pouring rain, into the lair of this phantom menace. The gates, be it by wind or supernatural force, shut behind me, leaving me in absolute darkness. Thankfully, in my sack I carried a sturdy iron lantern, filled with oil to last me hours. Once it was lit, the flame's gentle glow illuminated a relief on the wall. I immediately recognized what it was depicting. It was the Toxonomicon, the family tree of the Brood, painted originally by one Beowyn, a legendary dragon artist. We were shown them in our classes, led by Professor Ritius Opinionatus, who taught us all about the mischief and hurt caused by these soulless husks of men. He told us tales of how they mercilessly murdered all of art, and then art discussion alongside it. We were taught to stray far from anyone even associated with them. The relief on the wall seemed to match exactly the sketches from our tomes. I recognized some of the criminals immediately. Fringildius Frongladite, the plague doctor of green skin tone, who possessed the power to turn himself into a frog. Jay the Eximus, also known as the Sinner. He was one of the first to be challenged by the newly formed Brood to a fight, and the first one to accept it, only to be defeated and later join the enemy. And opposite to him was Jay the Longboned, a rogue Wakandan woman who dared to laugh at the masterpiece that was Batwoman. The two were oft confused by cadets and weathered scholars alike, and some believed them to be the same person. In the middle, to the lower right of the Longman himself, was the weeping visage of a German man, the metal commander who, thanks to his powers of commanding metal, led them all as robot in the battle against Justinian Ritius, yet fell defeated by Diabeto's fairly small meal, despite fasting for 3 days and 3 nights before it. To the Longman's left, the Paladin of Aden, a female of the Longoid species deemed extinct but for the masked Broodite himself. The Conqueror of Sumer, the Arched Warhammer, a remarkable Republican. Dictor van Doomcock, Theodore Theoden Tree, the exiled philosopher, rumored to possess many clones. The mimetic craftsmen from the land of Eamon and Shivia, along with their plagued creations from the meme repository. A small potato the famed autistic sophists, all present in this gallery of rogues. And atop the relief, I saw the false gods they worshipped, the Genesis, the cosmic chicken, roosting in his hair, and watching over them, the Dawn, the one who dared to assault and batter our marvelous goddess, and paid the price for his sexual harassment. And it was this downfall that got him the worship of the brood. Ironic. They worshipped a mere mortal, defeated by our heroic deity. And very soon they would meet a defeat of their own. I ventured down the hall, away from the entrance, and stepped into a spacious lobby. In its center, a statue was erected. Once more my memory went to our lectures about the brood, and I recalled the legend of Tonald Loke, also known as the White Samauri, more of a lover than a fighter, and a famed master of cooking. He was among the causes for which the toxic brood initially assembled, but with time they came to adore and worship him. Just another one of their false idols. And then I heard a faint song echoing, as if someone were playing a hate piano in these halls. I continued forth despite my fear, and I drew a knife from my pocket, should I encounter a foe. This dagger, that I was meant to put between the ribs of the Longman, was shaped after the rubble of the collapsed parts of our centuries-old Academy of Begidius, and out of the handguard one could pull out a small ruler to point them to the entrance, should they align it with the debris standing in the right place. After a minute of sneakily creeping, I came to a crossroads bathed in darkness even my lamp could not fully pierce through. I thought I was lost for a moment, when I realized that inscribed in a floor tile beneath my feet was a paw pointed south. I deduced it must have been a clue for the residents of the castle, and so I followed its course. And after a minute of creepily sneaking, I saw lights beyond a door ahead. I extinguished my lamp and approached the door. The melody I've been hearing echo through the halls now turned into just noise with no pattern. I pushed the door slowly to see if there was anyone on the other side. Beyond the door was a grand dining hall. In the corner sat a man sleeping on the table, with many a bottle of booze around him and an elongated 7-cylinder revolver on his hip. His sleep must have been quite deep, as he seemed blissfully unaware that the room was filled with blaring noise, and it seemed to be coming from a lone bowl on one of the otherwise empty tables. I tried to walk through, my steps masked by the noise, but it began to feel incredibly painful. I walked up to the bowl, covering my ears, and saw that the noise was in fact emitting from the soup contained within. I chucked the entire thing into the nearby fireplace, and to my relief, the noise ceased. I took a moment to breathe, and noticed a portrait hung above the fireplace. I pondered for a moment if this visage was supposed to be Alfred, but my thoughts were cut short by the sound of the critically drunk man shifting in his sleep. I darted to the nearest door and quickly jumped behind it. I found myself in a very dark hall. I pulled out a box of matches and lit one in order to relight my lantern, but then I heard the growling of a dog, and in the dim light I saw the maw of a truly frightening creature. Impossible. Lord Diabeto's most cunning creation, the Goliath, enslaved as a guard dog for the very objectivists it was meant to destroy. Snarling at me, trying to encircle me, I saw the faint reflection of the fire on my match in its eyes. But then the flame reached my fingers, and the burn caused me to drop it. I heard the growl in front of me and simply ran in the opposite direction, into the absolute darkness. I could hear the dreaded dog closing in on me, and I was sure my life was at an end, when suddenly I noticed a small rodent in the middle of the hallway. I jumped over it so as not to crush it, but stumbled and fell on the cold stone floor. I was sure I was done for now, but then I witnessed the most uncanny sight. The fearsome Goliath halted in his pursuit before the rat, and even more bizarrely, actually turned to flee from it. Once the beast was gone, the little creature looked at me and hid in its hole in the wall. Truly, the rodent that saved my life was a good rat. But it was not the end of my woes, as in the chamber that this hallway led to, I was met with yet another monstrosity, an indescribable, incomprehensible mess of 3 armored legs stitched together, rolling towards me with heavy thuds accompanying each step. It nearly crushed me, but I fled its arena into yet another chamber. Finally finding a moment of peace, I relit my lantern to illuminate my surroundings. I was in a seemingly dead-end room with nothing but some dusty shelves and tables. I could not return to the behemoth outside. I knew I must find some way to escape this room. After a couple minutes of desperately searching for any hidden door, switch, or hatch, I grew tired. I tried to rest against the wall, but then, suddenly, it turned out to be incorporeal, an artificial barrier of blockage, hiding a secret pathway I could use to get out. Invigorated anew, I entered the passage. This secret corridor may have been man-sized at first, but as I progressed, I found it to become more and more narrow. Perhaps it weren't my skills that got me delegated to this mission, and rather my diminutive size. I'd wager Lord Diabito would sooner ruin the whole fortress than fit through here with his immense grandness. But finally, I squeezed my way to a door. I pushed it open and jumped down into what seemed like a quite cozy study. From an adjacent kitchen, I heard a British man sing something about gay donuts in a raspy voice while he was boiling water for his tea and smoking his pipe. I quietly shut the door behind me, and it turned out to be a painting, arguably of a pirate. I tiptoed out of the study and into the corridor. It appeared to be some sort of a living quarters area, which meant I had to leave as quickly and quietly as I could to avoid detection. I managed to make my way through, jumping from shadow to shadow, hiding in the occasional potted plant, and I arrived at an iron door labeled with warnings and a sign saying, "Top Secret." Of course, anything that is the top secret of the Objectivists would also be of great interest to Lord Quintinius, so I went inside. The door led out to a catwalk, hanging above a forge where sword-like weapons were manufactured. Staves, maces, axes, guns, bows, and also flat pointy pieces of metal attached to a cross-shaped handle, the name of which escaped me. The weapons were being made in large quantities. Was the Longman planning something? I moved silently along the catwalk, watching from above as the workers, likely taken from some discord far, far away, were moving around, carrying materials one way and pieces of gear the other. I decided to follow them to see what could possibly be the goal of this operation. I began hearing noises, shouts and roars, like some massive horde was stationed nearby. The air was filling with a foul smell, like a mix of sulfur and excrement, as if somebody had placed a poop cactus in here somewhere long ago. And soon, I realized what exactly was causing all this. I found myself over the fuming pits of Tismgard, where the infamous Mauler's army was being assembled for assault. Using his dark powers of objectivity, the objective man crossbred tisms with men in order to create TLJ haters, the most hideous, misogynistic creatures known in the land. They rose out of mud, already screaming for leftist tears to quench their incel thirst, and the numbers, just from what I could see, reached 1.2 billion. It seemed that the reports from General Patricissimus H. Willimissimus were true. The Mauler's army was indeed coming to destroy us. The fate of all art and art discussion laid in my hands. My mission was to thrust the blade of my sword-like weapon between the ribs of the Longoid, as with his end, all objectivity would be destroyed. It was as sure as Soma not being a horror game. Following the catwalk to the other side of these spawning grounds, I arrived at a door and passed through. I once more found myself in a hall, but this one was larger than any previous one. In the moonlight pouring in from the windows, I saw a grand, ornate gate. I approached it quickly and pushed it open with great difficulty. Once inside, I was hit with a dreadful realization. I found myself in the chamber of the endless pauses, the effabatorium, the putrid panel, the place from which the verbal terrorists operated. On one end of the chamber, a grand display was hanging. Opposite to it were 7 thrones, and in the center stood the long throne, reaching all the way to the ceiling of the hall, the seat of the Longoid. Then suddenly, in the faint light of my lantern, I spotted a movement, and I was overcome with fear. The middle throne was not empty. In the darkness, a pair of red, unblinking eyes lit up, engulfing me like a searchlight. Then, the body of the creature started expanding, its limbs reaching such length that skin could no longer cover, revealing bare bone underneath an elegant attire. Soon, the Longoid was towering over me, peering from above with an evil eye, with a glass of rhino milk in hand. He lifted the glass up to his mask, and through means unknown emptied it in one large gulp. I was paralyzed, facing the beast I was meant to slay, the Longman, in the flesh. He spoke with a voice as deep as the themes of The Last Jedi.
What is a tism?
He flung his empty glass aside.
A miserable little pile of flism. But enough talk. Have at you, little clown boy.
From the shadows, 5 figures emerged and took a seat on the thrones at the Longman's side. Shadius the First, clad in a crimson brigandine and with a sword slung on his back. Fringildius Fronglodite, his green beak and his glowing yellow eyes peering from under the hood. Das Bullshit, with the ice pack on his head. The Sinner, the original betrayer, and finally, Raggers, the one who ruined his own grandmother, jumped onto the doggy bed at the Longman's right-hand side. The throne at the left-hand side was left vacant, a remnant after the Dishonored one. The sides of the hall quickly filled with cloaked figures, chatting and whispering amongst each other, likely waiting for the panel to begin preaching. I pulled out my knife and ran up to the objective man to push my blade into his cold, heartless heart. Spotting this, he reached out his monstrous arms, grabbed me by my wrist, and pulled the weapon out of my hand.
What'd you bring me?
He asked as he examined my dagger. He passed it to Shadius, who only chuckled at the sight of it. Then the unthinkable happened. He snapped the knife in half at its thinnest point, where it was shaped after the ruins of the Academy. The brilliant design of combining the weapon with a map turned out to be its fatal flaw. He then threw it over his shoulder in the most disrespectful fashion.
That's one stupid dagger,
quoth the Longman. I started backing off, unarmed and powerless. You'll never win, Longman, I shouted. Your objectivity fails to provide a single reason why The Last Jedi is bad. The entire panel groaned, as if it wasn't the first time they'd heard this.
Is that so?
Asked the Longman.
Let's hear you out then. Please, tell us what you think is good about it.
I froze. I was expecting a fight, an action-filled confrontation with the objective man, concluding in his violent end at my hand. Yet he wanted me to talk? While it was strange, and I knew I had to watch out for any trickery the brood might try to employ, I was far from unprepared. At the Great Academy of Begidius, exploring the deepest of themes and learning the best argumentation was the primary scholarly pursuit. All of my studying and learning led up to this moment. This is what I've been training for all this time. Well, I began. It has a strong theme of failure.
Oh yes, the movie's certainly full of it,
barked the dog on the panel. The entire hall erupted with uproarious laughter. I felt confused and angry. How dare they make fun of me instead of being completely serious? I looked towards Jay, realizing he had once stood in my exact place, yet now he sat among them, laughing with them, as if he had forgotten the fight he once lost. I felt a strong urge to kick him right in his traitorous bum. Once the laughter had died down enough for me to speak, I resumed with my stalwart defense. As I was saying, the movie has a theme of failure in it and characters growing from it. For example, Poe fails, "No!" shouted the plague doctor, and everyone in the hall repeated after him like a choir, and a wave of no's swept over the room.
Yeah, as Fringy said, that's not really true. He's the only person in the Resistance acting rationally, and blowing up the dreadnought saved everyone's lives,
elaborated the Longman, to unilateral agreement. But Leia slaps him and demotes him, I countered.
Does getting punished by an authority dictate whether you're right or not?
Suggested the man with the ice pack.
Because I know many censorious dictators that would happily agree with that.
Well, I tried to come up with an explanation, but against all my subjective opinion, something was telling me he was correct. But then, a perfect counter came into my mind. But you see, when he organized the mutiny and planned to hyperspace jump away, he would have killed everyone in the fleet. And why did it come to the mutiny? Asked the sword master from down under. Poe was being very hot-headed and he didn't know that Holdo had a plan.
Gee, if only someone had told him when he asked for it right before the mutiny!
Snarked the gay hound. Admiral Holdo suspected there was a mole in the fleet, I responded immediately, repeating the well-learned defense we've been taught in the Academy of Begidius. She didn't want to risk the First Order knowing that they'll be sending smaller ships out and abandoning the cruiser.
Didn't exactly work out that way though, did it?
Asked Fringildius.
As soon as the transports started flying, the First Order saw them and started firing at them, without needing a mole thanks to the whole decloaking scan bullshit,
said the Longman. That counters nothing, I shouted. Before that happened, she had the full right to suspect anyone.
Except for all the people actually fueling the ships and presumably loading supplies onto them?
Prodded Das Bullshit. Well, if Poe had been told the plan, he would have fucked everything up. He was hot-headed,
Except as soon as he had learned the plan, he was in full support. He even said, yeah, that would work.
The Longman cut me off.
You're wrong on this. Poe was the only reasonable individual on the ship.
You're just saying that because you hate women, I said in response. It was clear that against such stubborn opponents, I would have to roll out the heavy-hitting arguments. But instead of immediately forfeiting to their intellectual superior, the panel groaned.
Why don't you try an actual argument, you massive?
Shouted someone in the crowd, followed by laughter and shouts of agreement.
Let's just move on to something you're not demonstrably wrong about, shall we?
Proposed the objective man. Okay then, I agreed. Luke fails in the movie too. He fails to save his nephew.
I didn't know he even tried,
shouted the rag.
All I saw in the movie was him trying to kill Ben and then fucking off to an island without ever trying to talk to him again until the fight.
Yeah, you really don't want to defend Luke,
said the Longman.
His character was assassinated in this movie.
No, he wasn't, I responded immediately. Luke was just old. He changed. A roar of displeasement filled the hall. The Longman buried his gas mask in his hands. The green plague doctor was angrily jumping up and down, screaming,
No, 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 no.
Off the roof with him!
shouted the Egyptian god of the sun, whom I just noticed was in the hall also.
I don't think you quite understand Luke's character before the sequel era,
said Shadius.
In the original trilogy, Luke risked everything to try and save arguably the second most dangerous and evil man in the galaxy, after the Emperor, just because of the family connection they had. Luke would do anything for his family.
Especially considering that Ben was under his care and not actively running the faction he was fighting at the time,
continued the Longman.
It's completely unreasonable that Luke would sneak up on his sister's son with a drawn lightsaber based on just a suspicion.
But he was old! Before I could finish my counter-argument, I was drowned out by the overwhelming toxic negativity coming from everyone in the room.
When people get old, they don't suddenly undergo a personality change,
said the man with the ice pack.
If anything, he would have become even more set in his ways with age.
What does it matter anyway? It's a movie about space wizards intended for children. Rules don't matter.
Are you suggesting that children's entertainment is allowed to be terrible?
asked the Shiba Inu.
Wouldn't you think that child entertainment should be constructed with even more care because of how impressionable kids are?
It's not even true, though,
added the plague doctor.
The movie is full of violence and war. Is that stuff appropriate for children?
I was confused. We've been rehearsing and learning those arguments in the Academy of Begidius, preparing for confrontations like this. We were told these were foolproof, that they would convince any opposition. Yet there they were, unflinching in the face of my argumentation.
Why can't you just pretend it's what you wanted and see if you like it then?
I said, remembering the teachings of Professor Cinema Vincent. Suddenly, the hall fell silent. Not a single soul could respond to what I just said. It was so quiet, in fact, that I could hear a bot being beaten up with a wrench somewhere in the chatting crowd. Was this it? Did I convince the entirety of the Toxic Brood and the Fandom Menace to change their ways? Was I to be the messiah that saved art and converted everyone to subjectivity? But then, everyone burst into laughter. I had failed. The strongest, most scholarly arguments our side could muster. All this were but jokes to these soulless husks of men.
This is just my opinion! Why can't you just let me enjoy the film?
I cried out, but I was ignored. They did not care for my opinion. All that seemed to matter to them were the stupid rules and facts and canon. I laid down on the floor, crying, and soon reality faded away from me, as if at the snap of a finger. But when I woke up, I was no longer in the Longman's chamber in his high castle. I was laying on something coarse and rough and irritating, and I felt it get everywhere. I opened my eyes and saw the azure ocean, calm and smooth, the clear blue sky like another ocean up above, the bright sun casting heat onto the earth. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. I tried getting up to look in the direction they were coming from, but I was too weak.
You need a ride, darling?
It was a man with a radiant, confident smile. He offered me his right hand, wrapped in bandages. When I grabbed onto it, he was clearly in pain, but did not let go. He pulled me up onto my feet and breathed a sigh of relief. He motioned me to come with him, and we crossed over a dune to the nearby parking lot, to a lone motorcycle. He sat down, gave me his helmet, and told me to hold on to him. Although it was really gay, I wrapped my arms around him and we set off. The man told me we had a long way to go before we could reach what I was looking for. How would you know what I'm looking for? I asked.
Everyone looks for the same thing, don't they?
Came the reply from my driver.
We're all just trying to make sense of the world around us. Just as it applies to philosophy and science, it applies to the media we consume for entertainment. Us humans, we're very much imperfect, and despite all our ideas and past development, we still often make mistakes, forget things, miscommunicate ideas, misunderstand others. And since flawed people end up making our entertainment, their flaws carry over to their work. Unclear ideas, inconsistencies, contradictions, and sometimes just flawed execution. Media's full of that. And because everyone's different, and even for one person, different circumstances, moods, or just changing with age, the degree to which we pay attention, it can all affect our enjoyment. Much like with philosophy, there are many different ways people deal with their enjoyment. Some try to justify it, downplaying the flaws and exaggerating the positives. Others try to find deeper meaning in insignificant things, ascribing messages to accidental or meaningless things. Yet others try to bolster their enjoyment by degrading those who do not share it, explaining away any flaws they point out as a result of the personal shortcomings of the critics. But what all those positions share is that they're trying to make sense of their feelings. After all, if they enjoy something, it must be good. What would it say about them if they enjoyed a terrible thing? Conversely, they want to think that if they dislike something, then it must be indeed bad, and anyone who likes that thing clearly is bad too. The truth is more complicated than this. Our tastes and whims are easy to influence, even not intentionally. Not only that, our perceptions and memories are often untrustworthy, and what we end up thinking might be entirely baseless. It's important to differentiate between the subjective and the objective, separate our enjoyment from the technical quality of a work, judge the inconsistencies, contradictions, and contrivances as the flaws they are, and to learn to do so despite our enjoyment or lack of it. And when we do that, when we learn to look with a clear eye at the reality past our feelings, we can understand what we like and dislike better. We can learn the depth of what makes something well made and what degrades the quality. And we can learn to appreciate the craftsmanship involved in making something good. After all, why not have good craftsmanship in our media? Inconsistencies, contradictions, and contrivances are all errors. And while to err is human, it is also human to learn and grow from errors, avoid them in the future. And with the benefit of access to all past works of humanity, we need not even make those mistakes ourselves. We must only learn to pay attention and put in care into our work. A poorly made narrative can be enjoyed, but it will also be despised by those who care about quality beyond the subjective enjoyment. At the same time, a narrative crafted with care and passion can be disliked, but its quality cannot be disputed. In fact, an objective look might spawn appreciation where before you only had superficial impressions. Don't you agree?
While the man was talking, I was deep in thought. I reflected back on all the things I've learned in the Academy of Begidius, how their focus on the subjective experience was merely a shield to protect their mind from changing, how they ascribed depth to all sorts of little details while ignoring others, and how they all punished anyone who dared contradict them. I recalled Professor Cinema's Vincent telling us to pretend to enjoy something before approaching it critically, how we were scolded for watching movies wrong whenever anyone dared to point out flaws. All this time, we've been told we're improving art, while in fact we were making excuses for poor craftsmanship. And in response, the craftsmen became more lazy. And when the Skywalker rose, even our leaders had mixed feelings. Some even expressed the same critiques they were stomping out when directed at the previous film.
Hey,
The biker suddenly spoke, taking me out of my deep thought.
what's up with the long face?
I realize now the error of my ways, I said.
Don't worry about it,
The man comforted me.
How about a smile for me, huh?
And smile I did. I felt free now, free to enjoy whatever I wished, despite supposed bad hidden meanings. Free to take a critical eye at anything and enjoy the careful narrative craftsmanship. Free to point out the flaws and learn from them. Finally, the biker stopped and we got off the motorcycle. In the middle of the road stood a door with nothing behind it. I looked to the man confused, and he only gave me his radiant, gentle smile.
Once you cross this door, you'll wake up, he said.
I came up to the door and opened it. The other side greeted me with a black, bottomless void. As the biker started walking towards his vehicle, I turned to him and said, "Thank you for all you said. You really showed me a new way of thinking."
Don't mention it,
he replied. "In all this, I've forgotten to ask your name." He humbly smiled and looked down. After a moment he said,
"You can call me the Dawn."
I nodded, and as he rode off into the sunset, I took the step and plunged into the darkness beyond the door.
Hey, you. You're finally awake. You were trying to cross the border, right?
I opened up my eyes and looked around, confused. What? No, where am I? I found myself on a cart, with the Longman himself looking at me from above, and the rag beside him, and a couple of others I recognized from the Toxonomicon also on the cart.
You're in Chateau des Massifs, and we're riding out into the gardens for the celebration,
came the glib remark from the sheriff-looking man driving the cart. Celebration? What's the occasion?
It's an anniversary,
said the objective man.
100 battles won, over 70 allies made, over 70 massives defeated.
And then we finally arrived at the gardens, and I saw an epic sight. A grand feast, super chats whizzing through the air, drinks, food. The entire toxic brood was there, but instead of evil alt-right misogynist Nazis, they were casually hanging around, having fun. Even Satan himself was there, happy as ever. Someone was lamenting that they were out of cream. A paladin was napping next to that Star Wars girl. Shadius the First was demonstrating his amazing sword flourishes to the crowd and challenging volunteers to try out his backscabbard. Medea was there too. There was even a Joe in honey there, a pool full of honey for people to jump into. "This is my favorite part," said someone in a seemingly bored tone, and soon after, a bundle of fireworks flew into the air and exploded overhead, forming the letters 100 faps and 100 more ahead in the sky before the sparks faded away. "Wow!" I called out in awe. "All this, it's nothing like what I was told about you."
It's funny, isn't it?
said the Longman in response.
All it took to reveal the lie was to come and see for yourself.
Yeah, I suppose. Despite his gas mask, I could swear I could tell he was smiling at me. And after a short moment of silence, he said,
Why don't you stay and see some more?